Hello and welcome to your one-stop shop for economic policy analysis. You're watching Policy Watch. For the second week running, our top story is from the telecom space. After the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India issued a fresh set of guidelines for the 2G spectrum auction, it set off a storm in the telecom industry, especially amongst GSM operators. The top honchos of major telecom companies, including Bharti Airtel, Vodafone, Telenor and Idea Cellular, descended on the capital this week and met the Telecom Minister Kapil Sibal. They demanded a relook into the guidelines and urged the government to junk these recommendations, citing irreparable damage to the telecom sector as their rationale for doing so. I'm Athar Khan, and my guest this week is an old colleague and mentor, Soma Bannerjee, National Policy Editor of the Economic Times. Welcome to the show, Soma. It's a pleasure having you on the show finally. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of our top stories, let me ask you this. Your first thoughts on the new set of recommendations by TRAI. Do you think, as telcos allege, that they're very harsh on major players?
Well, I agree completely with the telecom companies because the kind of recommendations that have come in from TRAI seems to be pretty illogical from many sides, from many points of view. And I think the telcos realize this. They have taken it, as you mentioned, to the telecom minister. They've escalated it to the prime minister, and they have, they're making the case even in media houses. And that's quite natural. For one, look at what they're giving as the reserve price. I still haven't got the math behind what led to this kind of a reserve price. Number two, the kind of megahertz or spectrum that's on the table is far too little. The government seems to be keeping some part of the broadband spectrum with itself, which it wants to farm out at a second stage, which is kind of not understandable. And I think the bigger question, which the telcos have been emphasizing themselves, and I think that's very important from the viewers as well as our point of view, what does all this mean for consumers? Because ultimately, you're looking at a set of consumers in the country who are really doing well as far as the telecom industry is concerned, who are going to face the brunt of all this.
We'll take a look at the story first. Now, the Telecom Commission will send a second reference note to TRAI, which will include the industry's views on the new set of guidelines floated by TRAI for the 2G spectrum auctions. Telecom Minister Kapil Sibal met the representatives of the telecom industry in New Delhi on Wednesday and also said that the government has taken no decision yet and will take the views of the industry in consideration as well before announcing the guideline as a regular policy.
After four top honchos of major telecom players met the Telecom Minister Kapil Sibal in connection with the new set of guidelines floated by TRAI for 2G spectrum, the Telecom Commission has indicated they might be sending a second reference note on the guidelines to TRAI. TRAI's new proposals have evoked sharp reactions from the industry, with global giant Vodafone and Norwegian company Telenor already having written to the government expressing their concerns.
I think if decisions are taken in the interest of the industry, there have to be changes, because I think the current recommendations would, kill the industry, so to speak.
No, I think you presented a case and shown inconsistency of the recommendations made by TRAI. I mean, that's our purpose of meeting the senior ministers and leadership, to show to them that this industry is important.
Last week, the telecom regulator had proposed a multi-fold increase in the base price for the upcoming 2G spectrum auctions. Telenor has already threatened to exit the Indian market if the new guidelines are accepted. The four telco chiefs also met Finance Minister Pranab Mukherjee and Telecom Secretary R. Chandrasekhar. After the meeting with the telco chiefs, Kapil Sibal said that all the views of the telecom industry will be kept in mind before accepting the recommendations.
We had a full discussion. They explained to me their concerns about the recommendations of the TRAI, and we said that we will certainly look into all their concerns.
The next meeting of TRAI is on 7th of May, while the Telecom Commission meets a week later. The final decision, however, will be taken by the empowered group of ministers. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
That's right. That was Kapil Sibal talking about the meeting he had with the telco chief, the four big chiefs, as we call them. let's talk about the refarming proposal. Sunil Bharti Mittal has come out and has a scathing comments on the refarming proposal. The big three, Vodafone, Bharti and Airtel, will have to shell out a cumulative of about 95,000 crore if the government accepts these recommendations. They're not going to like that. To buy back spectrum they already own and pay much more for it. They're not going to like that.
Yeah, I think the bigger point which they're trying to make is, this follows the Supreme Court decision on the cancellation of licenses. So the cancellation of licenses was around 122 licenses. The kind of spectrum that was taken back because of that is far larger than what the government is offering. Second, this bit and piece approach by the government because they've thought of a refarming. There's also the question of the broadband, whether it's 900 or 1800, because it deals with completely different infrastructure. Setting up towers for an 1800 and 900 is very different, and so if they have to move from one to the other, that would mean complete reset of network towers, etc. Thirdly, and I think that's another point which they have made, is the question of a rollout schedule. The government has come with these recommendations along with a rollout schedule that you need to go here or there, etc. Now the question is, the players say, you don't give me the spectrum, you change my infrastructure requirements, you force me to go inside where there is no revenue model or business model. So how do they continue? I mean, most of them are today saying that if this has to be accepted, then they have to shut shop. Exactly. Now, a Telenor can say that and move out of the country. What happens to companies like Airtel or even Vodafone? They have sunk money in this country, and the consumer base they have base. Importantly, like I said before, the consumers. What I understand with my conversations with them is that in most cases, you're going to be left with dark holes. So it could be that because of this spectrum reallocation or refarming, which they are talking, so you are over here and we're getting our signals, we move away a little bit and you don't get your signals. Forget about moving to remote places. I mean, today you could get the Sukma collector right on television all through virtually because you have cell phones available. Right. Imagine tomorrow that you don't have it even within cities. That is what they are saying will happen if the government doesn't take a corrective step at this point.
It's a huge issue. Also, you talked about tariffs being raised. Of course, if these recommendations, these guidelines do pass muster and the government does accept that as policy, Airtel, Vodafone, and all the major telecom players say it'll automatically translate into tariffs being raised. They'll also have to change their business models, I've heard some people say. Do you think that the good run that Indian consumers had for a very long time of cheap telecom, of cheap cellular services is about to get over? If these and do you see them raising tariffs at all?
Well, I don't think they have any choice. I don't think, this is going to be a cost for them. So a cost cannot be absorbed. A cost has to be passed on. So I think the government... it's a kind of diabolical, On one side, they're talking of inclusive growth. Right. They're talking of penetration into rural areas. They're talking of getting the have-nots into the picture. On the other side, they are working on policies which go and increase the raw material cost. It actually raises a larger question, which I have been dabbling with for a long time now, is that what should be the government's policy when it comes to natural resources? Is profit maximization the objective for government for the natural resources? Whether it is a coal mine, whether it is airwaves, whether it is oil exploration, these are nature's gifts which are possibly there for every country. Now, the choice for the government is I jack up the raw material cost, which is what they're saying, that I jack up the reserve price, and therefore I get a huge booty into my exchequer. But where does that go? That goes to the consumer. Do you want consumers, therefore, to switch off or not get the facilities because they just can't afford it? Or should the government look at something like revenue sharing? So let the company get the raw material at a cheaper price. When they make profits, you get a good chunk of that as revenue share, which will allow even consumers to get the benefit.
Fair point, Soma. A lot of a point that you share with a lot of people that I keep talking to these days. Let's talk about the reference to TRAI's sending a second reference note, getting a second reference note. The Telecom Commission meets on the 14th of May. TRAI meets on the 7th of May. Do you really see them tinkering with those guidelines, or perhaps asking them to remove the most contentious ones like the refarming proposal or the base price, the minimum reserve price? Do you see that happening at all?
I think the government has to do a rethink. I don't know to what extent they're going to budge from it, but my sources, or rather my information is that even the telecom ministry is not really fully comfortable with what TRAI has. You know, this could also be a strategy. You put the worst case scenario ahead. It gives you a good bargaining place, and then you come to somewhere which is acceptable to both. But I feel that the way it is today, it looks very difficult that it will go through as is where is. I think that ministries are convinced about the fact that there's a case to be looked at.
Sure, we'll take a short break. We'll continue talking about all things telecom after the short breather. Don't go anywhere. We'll continue our conversation with Soma Bannerjee right after the break. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're still watching Policy Watch, and we're still in conversation with Soma Bannerjee. Soma, these recommendations, of course, like we talked about, industry is up in arms against it. Even like you said, the telecom department is also kind of concerned about what policy they want to. It does have some sort of silver lining, though. In case these recommendations in the current form do pass, TRAI has estimated the value to be about 7 times what they got from auctions last time around in 2008 when Raja was the minister. Wouldn't that kind of ease out the fiscal situation that Pranab Mukherjee is facing right now? He would get a windfall, but people also say in case he does get that money, that would be taking 1 step forward and 3 steps backward because telecom is a sunshine sector and this would affect operators as well. Do you think that would be a sort of catch-22 situation for the government? Getting the money they want but also hurting the sector in the meantime?
I think it's a very short-term view because, you know, it's like killing your egg that gives you, the goose that gives you the egg. Because you're going to get a huge money or huge spectrum fund from them because of the auctions. But what are you doing? You're killing this industry, you're killing these companies. So what is going to come to you as corporate taxes, as excise, as any other service taxes, you know, the kind of money that the sector actually involves, job generation, everything, you know, you're going to kill all that. So you will get a one-time money, you will probably ease your fiscal deficit, but then, you know, 2 years hence, you're going to cry because there's a sector which was giving you money which is going to go bankrupt. So I think to look at it as one solution for your fiscal deficit is definitely not the way to look at policies which are long-term. Remember, these are 20-year policy, 15-year policy, you know. So the question is, what are you really getting at, you know?
Right. That's a fair question that you asked, of course. Let me ask you this last question on this particular story. Do you think, in the current form, given the hullabaloo that has been created by these recommendations, and everyone in the industry is against it, even some policymakers I've talked to do actually junk these TRAI regulations, the new set of regulations, that they're not binding on the government right now. Do you think, in the current form, it is advisable, or do you see it happening that the government will accept these recommendations and put them down as policy? Do you see that happening at all?
I don't see. Actually, I don't see it going as is where is. I'm sure that there are going to be some tinkering that has to be done, simply because, like what you're saying, that there is no unanimous consent or consensus within the government on this. TRAI, and I'm telling you, it could be a strategy. It could be that you give the worst possible situation, so it gives them a place to bargain. They can say, okay, we give you this, we take away this, etc., and they come out at a better solution. It looks completely impossible, but you know, with this government, with with regulators, one never knows. But God bless the telecom industry. If
so you're saying there might be just another set of recommendations.
I'm pretty confident of that.
Let's just hope for the telecom industry sake that actually happens.
And for you and me.
And for you and me, the consumers will be the ones who will be most affected. We'll take a look at the second story that we have today. That's your area of expertise. It's to do with the petroleum ministry. You're, of course, one of the best petroleum ministry reporters that I know. So let's take a look at that story first. Now, the Petroleum Ministry has urged the Finance Ministry to pay around 49,000 crore to compensate losses incurred by the state-run oil marketing companies in the absence of a hike in the consumer price of transport and cooking fuels. The Oil Ministry is of the view that oil marketing companies, Indian Oil Corporation, Bharat Petroleum and Hindustan Petroleum will report losses of 20,000 crore, rupees 10,000 crore and rupees 8,500 crores respectively for 2011-12. Here's the story.
Writing to the Finance Ministry, the Oil Ministry has said that a gap of 38,790 crore rupees remained unpaid in 2011 and 12 due to non-revision of diesel, kerosene and LPG prices, and 10,300 crore rupees due to petrol price freeze and interest compensation on deferred payments. Of a total under-recovery of 1,39 crore rupees incurred by the OMCs in 2011 and 12, the Finance Ministry provided 45,000 crore rupees as cash assistance from the budget, and 53,000 crore rupees is to come through discounts from upstream companies. Using $120 per barrel price of crude oil with an exchange rate of ₹50 to a US dollar, the OMCs could lose 1,13,000 crore rupees on diesel, 32,000 crore rupees on kerosene and 44,000 crore rupees on LPG in 2012 and 13 if the EGM fails to raise the retail price. And if the artificial price control on petrol continues, they would lose an additional 5,000 crore rupees each quarter. The EGOM is headed by the Finance Minister Pranab Mukherjee. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
There you go, Soma. Give us a sense of what the oil marketing companies are going through. The inaction on diesel deregulation by the government, so-called policy paralysis. What are they feeling right now? Are they fearing losses, big losses?
I don't think it's a question of fear anymore. It's kind of certain that they're going to get into losses.
It's going to be reality.
It's a reality.
Yeah.
You know, before we get into what the government is doing on diesel, I have a huge question on this artificial control on petrol. Petrol has been deregulated, I think, thrice or four times over. Yeah. This time it is for sure. Today they're talking about a hike of about 8 to 10 rupees per litre. They have to bring it to market prices. Petrol prices haven't changed over the last few months, what with the elections, etc. Now the question is, are oil companies going to show some grit or are they going to follow the government order? Petrol is a deregulated item in policy, in paper, in everything. Raising petrol prices per say 1 rupee, 2 rupee, 3 rupee per month over the last few months would probably be a better option. But we've seen that the petrol prices haven't gone up. Now, who is this person who's stopping them? Now, we need to face this question. The Finance Ministry will tell you it's a deregulated fuel, we have nothing to do about it. So is it the Petroleum Ministry? Is it the oil companies themselves? Are they being more loyal than the master themselves? I mean, who is stopping them to increase petrol prices? Petrol, unlike diesel, is not an input fuel.
Right.
It's a rich man's fuel for most purposes. It's an urban fuel for most purposes. And nothing stops petrol prices from going up, where everything else... I mean, if people can go to a market today and buy 80 rupees a kg for brinjal, you surely can pay 5 rupees more for your petrol. You are people who are driving through 3 cars, right? So first question is that, have you done enough to at least exercise the powers that have been given to you? If not, what is stopping them? If it is the Petroleum Ministry's diktats, informally or formally, then the government needs to look into that. Are they really doing the right thing? There seems to be a divide within the government on this.
Right.
If you talk to Finance Ministry people, they're very clear. This is something which we should not be getting into because this is deregulated, right? So that takes care of petrol,
Right.
which is the smaller problem.
Right, right.
The bigger problem is, of course, diesel. And if you see the Prime Minister, the Finance Minister, everyone, each one of them, right after the budget, if not in as many words, said we have to bite the bullet on oil prices.
Yeah. And enough indications.
I mean, they've said it. Now the question is of doing it, right? Unfortunately for this government, there always seems to be some crisis which takes over, and they kind of move away from what they need to do. So first it was the state elections, then it's the finance bill, and now they have the presidential elections. You know, with wanting to get all the allied parties on board, with a strident party like TMC or even a Jayalalitha, or even, Jayalalitha is not an ally, but DMK, you know, they will have a difficulty in maneuvering this.
Right.
But you know, ultimately, the government has to bite the bullet. If not, then your Fortune 500 company, IOC, I don't think remains a Fortune 500 anymore. Most of these companies, I think, will end up losing even their Navratna status because they cannot go on. And just imagine what is going to happen for borrowings. These companies don't have the capacity anymore to go and borrow.
Right.
So ultimately it's going to hit your crude imports.
Right.
Can you do without petrol, diesel running in your country?
You make a very valid case for deregulating prices. I was interviewing a former petroleum minister just the day before, and he had a slightly different take on it. When I asked him about diesel deregulation and other deregulation of other fuels as well, he came out with a scathing remark on people in the government who are pushing for a price increase either in petrol or deregulating diesel prices. When I asked him why, he said, people in the government who are pushing for this deregulation of prices are in complete disconnect with reality of the Aam Aadmi. Now, that particular minister, former minister, might be out of favor of this party, but he also said that people who are pushing for it, because they're disconnected, they rely on their Cambridge and Oxford degrees to actually push policies that might not be good for the Aam Aadmi. Do you agree with that?
I don't. I think we're being very short-sighted again. What is more important for the Aam Aadmi? Is it the vegetable he buys, the food he buys, the train he travels in, the public transport he moves in? What you're doing today is making him live in a fool's paradise. You're talking of a disconnect with the people. The people are, how many times do you see people walking on the streets and saying, "Why doodh kada?" Milk prices have gone up, sugar prices have gone up. I mean, these are your everyday items. These are things which go into the kitchen every day, okay? So if people are beginning to understand there's a cost for this, particularly for a country like India, which has to import bulk of its crude oil, then what kind of Aam Aadmi are you talking about? Which people are, you know the case in the power sector, right? The people who are getting power by theft or by whatever, or even kerosene. I mean, I'd like to go back to, and I think you're alluding to Mr. Iyer over here, who is a very much, a pro-people man. My own experience is a place like Sundarban, which does not have electricity, they buy kerosene at 200 rupees a litre. Is that what you're actually meaning by what you're doing for the Aam Aadmi?
Right.
I think they are really divorced from reality. Reality is something else when you go and see what they are having to do.
Right, Soma, fair point. One more question on this particular story, but that's after the break. Don't go anywhere. It's just getting interesting on Policy Watch. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're still watching Policy Watch. Soma, let me put you on the line here. The elections are over. The budget is over. The session is almost over. It's going to get over in another 20 days or something. There's still no word from the government on deregulating prices. Do you see them biting the bullet this year at all?
This year, this calendar year?
This calendar year.
They better. They better. Otherwise, we're going to go back to the case when we had to pledge our gold.
Right.
They don't have a choice over here.
Right.
I think what one apprehends is maybe presidential election. So July is when I think once your president election is off, they need to take some
So you're
serious
saying
calls.
they don't really have a choice, otherwise they're
They don't have a choice. There's no money. I mean, the government does not have money to provide these kind of subsidies. So where is the revenue going to come from? They have a huge subsidy burden. They have a huge fiscal deficit staring at them. There is no such huge coming of revenue. I mean, until unless your spectrum does that for
if that becomes policy
yeah,
at all.
I mean, then I don't know. Maybe this year they can do. But I don't see that happening. I mean, if that happens, this government is there for another 2 years, remember, if elections don't come in before. And somebody has to pay the cost for this. So I really don't see it not happening. But I think it may not happen just yet, at least diesel, before the presidential elections, because they really need their numbers intact for the presidential election to go
Right, a lot for the government to think about. We'll move into our last story of the program now. Now, there's good news for cotton exporters as the government has further eased restriction on the export of their products starting last week. In a joint review by the Agriculture, Commerce and Finance Ministers, the government had decided that the production in the cotton year ending September 30th is enough to cater to domestic demand as well. The proposal is based on the report of the Cotton Advisory Board, which revised the production numbers upwards and reduced the estimated domestic consumption numbers.
Registration of cotton for exports will be allowed by the government, and the group of ministers will review it within 2 to 3 weeks.
That's it. Short and sweet by Anand Sharma. But again, Soma, let me... classic case of flip-flop again from the government. On March the 5th, they banned export of cotton, restricting any exports, further exports of cotton. Just a week later, on March the 12th, the Commerce Ministry comes out and says, okay, all the pending orders that have been given before the March 5th order can be exported. So then now just last week they've eased all restrictions. Is this government suffering from a classic case of flip-flops in all policy decisions?
Is it just flip-flop? Is it policy paralysis, or is it something much beyond that? This kind of statements over just a span of 2 weeks can really create havoc in the market. Remember, whenever a country like India, which is big in global play as far as exports and imports are concerned, in the sense we place an order, it makes a change in the international markets as well. So on what kind of feedback are these people taking these decisions on? And when the Commerce Minister made his point the first time, banning exports, you'd remember that it was the Agriculture Minister who said, I was not even in the loop. So what is really happening is that ministries or ministers or departments in the government are really working against each other. I mean, they seem to not be on the same page at all.
They need to work on that, obviously.
Yeah, surely. I mean, that's something which is so prominently written as far as this government is concerned, that they're not on the same page.
If you have Soma, we are completely out of time. I wish this was a 1 hour show, but it's not. That was Soma Bannerjee, National Policy Editor of the Economic Times. Of course, what came out of the discussion was today that the telcos do have a valid case. It's a harsh set of recommendations. It'll kill the sunshine sector, like we heard Sunil Bharti Mittal say and Kumara Mangalam Birla say as well. TRAI needs to have a relook at these recommendations and come out with a better set of recommendations which actually helps the telecom sector and does not pull it back. On the other story, of course, the government will have to bite the bullet at some point. The OMC is needed, the sector needs it, otherwise our financial will go all haywire. On the last point, like Soma said, the government has differing views amongst ministries and ministers. They need to work on that if they want to survive the next 2 years and even beyond that. Thank you so much, Soma, for joining us on Policy Watch. That's all the time we have this week. We'll come back next week with a new guest, a fresh show. Till that time, it is Athar Khan saying goodbye and thanks for watching.